We'd just like to introduce you, Philipp, all the way from the University of Geneva, where you're Associate Professor of Responsible Finance and Senior Chair in the Swiss Finance Institute. And your topic today is, as you can see on the screen, do responsible investors invest responsibly? We're delighted to have you speak to us at our Assembly of Investment Chairs, and we're looking forward to what you have to offer from a global perspective. So please, over to you, Philipp.
Great, thanks a lot for inviting me. I mean, particularly thanks to Sebastian Gericke for reaching out. It's a great pleasure and obviously a great honor and privilege to address this distinguished audience at the 2022 Assembly of Investment Chairs. It's also, already quite late here in Geneva. It's almost 10 p.m. I just put my two sons to bed. They're sleeping, thank God. But I mean, it's quite remarkable that I can still address this conference despite being more than 15,000 kilometers away, and despite the fact that you're already one day ahead of me. But anyways, so the starting point for this presentation is really this observation that many institutional investors around the world now claim or incorporate ESG considerations into their decision making. And I think a testament to the increasing importance of ESG themes, ESG concepts to investment decision making is really the rise of the principles for responsible investment, which has grown probably from being a negligible investment initiative in 2006, negligible only in terms of size, not in terms of importance, obviously, to actually being the largest investment initiative or investor initiative that has ever existed today, with as of 2021 uniting more than 4,000 investment organizations and all sorts of finance organizations that collectively represent or manage more than 100 trillion in assets as a whole. So as you probably all know, by signing the principles for responsible investment, signatory institutions, they commit or adhere, or they commit to adhering to the 6 responsible investment principles, with the first one being that as a signatory institutions should or will incorporate ESG issues into investment analysis and decision-making processes. So while this first principle is relatively straightforward and clear, it is much less clear if investors or responsible investors, signatories of the PRI, actually adhere to this first principle. That is to say, do they actually invest or act as responsible investors? I mean, they have to, well, they don't have to, they kind of commit to doing so, but actually very little is known if they actually do so in practice. And this is really the theme of a recent paper that I co-authored with a team of co-authors, international co-authors, not only from the University of Geneva, but also from the Fed and the University of Virginia in the United States. So we really have written this paper on the question, on the still open question of whether responsible investors really do invest responsibly. And you can download this paper, by using either this QR code or reaching out to me via LinkedIn. I'd be very happy to send a copy of it to you. So as I said, the main theme of this paper is really the question of whether investors who have publicly committed to responsible investment actually do so in practice. And we ask a series of questions around this theme in this paper. So the first question we ask is whether, compared to non-signatory institutions, PRI signatory institutions exhibit better ESG performance in their equity portfolios. So that's sort of the first question we address in this paper. The second question we address is, whether there are actually differences in the ESG performance of these signatory institutions across geographic locations of these investors. Okay, so is it the case that, perhaps in some areas of the world, PRI signatories tend to have better portfolio level ESG performance, whereas in others, they don't? Now, the third question we ask in this paper is whether PRI signatories improve their equity portfolio ESG performance after joining the PRI initiative. And then we also ask the question of whether ESG portfolio performance of PRI signatories depends on the extent of reported ESG incorporation. So the extent to which they incorporate ESG principles in their investment management decisions. And then finally, if we find any geographic differences in terms of PRI signatories' ESG performance, what could potentially explain these? Okay, so I'll now present a couple of graphs addressing these different questions. So the first question is really this very simple question of whether PRI signatories have better ESG performance in their equity portfolios. And to answer that question, what we need is sort of an objective quantification or measure of a investor's ESG performance at the equity portfolio level. And to construct this measure, what we do is we combine ESG scores at the firm level from different data providers, which we aggregate to address this known issue that ESG scores issued by different data providers can diverge. So to circumvent that, we use multiple ESG scores at the firm level, and then combine that with the equity holdings of institutional investors between 2003 and 2017 to calculate a portfolio level ESG measure. Okay, and I'll now show you just one equation. Don't be scared; it's the only one I'll show you today, and it's actually much simpler than it looks like. So what we do is we use these ESG scores of the firms and combine them with the capital weights that these investors attach to the different firms in which they invest to calculate a portfolio level ESG performance measure. So it's a bit like a evaluated return, but it's not a financial return. It's sort of the average ESG score of the firm in the equity portfolio of these institutional investors. And we can calculate this performance measure at an annual level. So we could calculate it once per year for 10,000 of investors between 2003 and 2017. So the idea behind this measure is that let's say if investors are more serious about ESG incorporation, they should have somewhat better or higher levels of this portfolio ESG performance score, or improving levels of this portfolio level ESG performance score. Okay, so kind of the better, let's say the more concerned the investor is with ESG aspects, we would expect that they have higher portfolio level ESG scores and or improving ESG portfolio scores over time. Okay, and then the research approach is simply to examine whether PRI signatories relative to non-signatories have better portfolio ESG performance scores. Obviously controlling for a lot of other investor characteristics, for instance, whether they're an asset owner or an investment manager, controlling for sort of the location of the investor, the size of the investor, etc. So it's a bit like looking at partial correlations. Now, regarding the first question that we asked, so really, do PRI signatories have better ESG performance in their equity portfolios compared to non-signatory institutions? So what we find is that on average they do. Okay, so on average, the signatories have better ESG performance at the portfolio level. So this is sort of this yellow bar on the very left. So in terms of magnitudes, they have about 13% of a standard deviation better ESG performance. Okay, so it's not massive, okay, but it's not small either. It's kind of a non-negligible difference. Now, quite interestingly, this better ESG score comes primarily from better G scores at the portfolio level, okay, and to a much lesser extent from better environmental scores. Okay, so in fact, PRI signatories do not have better portfolio level environmental scores compared to non-PRI signatories. Now, the second question we ask is whether there are geographical differences. Okay, so specifically, we look at the United States. Okay, so we look at whether US PRI signatories differ from non-US PRI signatories. Okay, and sort of what we find is, if you look at these yellow bars here, is that US PRI signatories have at best the same ESG portfolio level scores, if not worse, portfolio level ESG scores compared to non-signatories. Okay, so these bars, they kind of tell us always a difference relative to non-signatories. Okay, so for the US, we find that US PRI signatories, there's not strong evidence that they have much better ESG portfolio performance relative to non-signatories. So it's primarily the investors from outside the US, right? So from other parts of the world where PRI signatories seem to be walking the ESG talk. Okay, so meaning that they actually do have significantly higher ESG portfolio level scores. Now, the third question we ask is whether PRI signatories improve their equity portfolio ESG scores or performance after joining the PRI initiative. And here again, we have sort of the green bars is, all countries, or let's say investors from all countries outside of the US. We kind of find, some evidence that is the case. Okay, so when we compare sort of the pre-signing and post-signing difference in ESG scores, relative to a matched sample of non-signatories, we find that non-US PRI signatories tend to improve their portfolio scores after joining. However, there's very little evidence that this is the case in the US. Okay? So in the US, there is no significant difference for signatories post signature of the, or post signing of the PRI relative to pre-signing. Now, one nice feature about the PRI, well, there are many nice features about the PRI, but one nice feature about the PRI is that by signing the PRI, institutional investors commit to reporting on their progress towards implementing the principles for responsible investment. Okay, so they have to, on an annual basis, at least since 2013, kind of give account of their ESG implementation efforts, to kind of show whether they make progress towards ESG outcomes. And so we use these progress reports to classify PRI signatories into 3 camps. Okay, so the first one is sort of the top of the class, let's say. So these are PRI signatories that report that they really do full ESG incorporation in their equity investment management. Now, there's a second group that reports to partially do so. And then there's a third group of sort of kind of bad students that either do not report any information on the extent to which they incorporate ESG in aspects in their investment decision making, or they simply do report that they do no incorporation whatsoever. Okay? And we also look at how the portfolio scores of these 3 groups compare to those to the non-signatories. Okay. So if you focus on the green bars first here. Okay, so this is again for split up for non-US signatories and US signatories. And so perhaps not surprisingly, it's primarily the non-US PRI signatories that report to fully incorporate ESG factors into their investment management that tend to have better portfolio ESG performance than non-signatory institutions. Now, quite concerningly, if you look at the US, actually this third group that reports not to incorporate ESG factors at all in their investment decision making, they actually turn out to have worse ESG portfolio performance compared to non-signatories. Okay, so there's really a serious concern of greenwashing among the subset of US institutions that signs the PRI, right, but doesn't do anything in terms of ESG incorporation. So I'm almost done. I'll hurry up. So we then zoom in a bit on what characterizes this problematic group here, this greenwashing group of US PRI signatories. So essentially, these are institutions that are characterized by low performance prior to signing. So these are institutions that are more retail client facing. Okay, so probably in a better position to greenwash because they are subject to less scrutiny from more sophisticated clients like the types of clients you are, and they're also late PRI joiners. Okay, so essentially, in this paper we document that there is some evidence of serious greenwashing among a subset of US PRI signatories. Okay, and then we also tried to get a better understanding of these differences between the US and the rest of the world, okay, which are sort of a common theme that runs through the entire paper. And we tried to explain, what might drive this greenwashing behavior among US institutions, well, let's say a subset of US-based institutional investors. Okay, so the first explanation we provide is that in the US, it appears that the decision to join the PRI seems to be much more commercially driven. Okay, so they seem to join the initiative not for sustainability considerations or responsible investment considerations, but they seem to be much more driven by commercial motives. The second reason for these, US versus non-US differences is that there is still sort of some legal uncertainty in the US about the fiduciary compatibility of ESG investing, even though that kind of, swaps or flip-flops with, whatever, political party is in power in the US at a given point in time. But we find like some evidence that, the absence of a clear consensus or message about the fiduciary compatibility of ESG investing is one reason for these, problematic US results. And then finally, there's also the issue of lower market maturity in terms of ESG in the US compared to other parts of the world. Now, let me wrap up. So what are the main takeaways from this paper? So the main takeaway is that, on average, it seems to be the case that PRI signatories seem to be walking their ESG talk. Okay, so they kind of do invest responsibly. However, once you go beyond that average effect, there are actually very important heterogeneities among these PRI signatories. Okay, so first of all, some investors, in particular those that report to fully incorporate or implement ESG investing, it's really these investors that walk the talk. Those that say to do so partially or say so to not do any integration, their picture is much less clear that they actually walk the ESG talk. And then there's obviously this important geographic heterogeneity. Now, what are some important implications for asset owners or policymakers from our research? I think for asset owners, one important policy implication is that it is not advisable to treat PRI signatories as a homogeneous group. Okay, so there's really, let's say if you allocate money to fund managers, with the intention of this money to be invested in a responsible way, you have to look beyond the PRI label. Okay, so the PRI label to some extent is not informative because of these heterogeneities. And then perhaps one other implication more for policymakers from our research is that it is very important to clarify the fiduciary compatibility of ESG investing, because that can improve the extent to which fund managers implement ESG investing. So thanks a lot for the attention. And I hope you found this interesting.
Thank you very much. Insightful around what gets measured gets done, and you can hide a lot of things behind a label, can't you, called PRI? So that's a really strong message. So thank you very much, Philip. Any questions from the floor? I thought it was a very clear presentation around the issues we face.